day protests that that took place yesterday. I guess tell me your thoughts regarding it.
Look, I think it's important to be nuanced about this because we have to accept the fact that when you have thousands of people out there protesting, as much as the cause might well be worthy, and I personally think it's a worthy cause, there is a genuine risk here that this could be a super spreader event, that 2 weeks from now, we could see cases spike up significantly. I mentioned the outdoor spread in New South Wales hasn't been recorded, but with that many people packed together, many of them without masks, it's entirely possible. And if that does happen, I do think this could backfire completely because a lot of people who oppose lockdowns might look at that and say, these guys are responsible for making the spread even worse than it was before. So I'll acknowledge that point. But I do want to make this other point here, which I think is equally important. What are people supposed to do when their backs are against the ropes, right? We've been told, look, these lockdowns are going to be in place until we get case numbers down. Well, it's been 4 weeks and case numbers keep climbing every single day. Hundreds and hundreds of new cases keep coming up. What we're doing so far is not working. Where we've not been given any sunset date, any date by which the government will finally say, okay, this isn't working, this isn't worth it anymore, we can't do this. No sunset date, nothing to look forward to in the future, just a perpetual grind. And on top of that, the government, New South Wales government has said, oh, look, there have been some hints that once we get to 70% or 80% vaccination, then we don't have to worry about restrictions anymore, or we can lift all these restrictions. Well, number one, we barely got 10% vaccinated so far. But number two, if you want to wait that long, it could take until Christmas. That's one problem. And I don't think anyone wants to be locked down all the way until Christmas. Number two, Scott Morrison, our great prime minister, he made a statement. He said, vaccines are not a substitute for lockdowns. Even if everyone in the country, and I don't think everyone is going to get vaccinated, but even if everyone in the country gets vaccinated, there's no guarantee lockdowns will stop. Lockdowns are a part of our management strategy to get the case numbers down, to potentially eradicate the virus. And what are people supposed to infer from that? A lot of people are lining up for a vaccine because they think to themselves, COVID sounds dangerous, but I really just want to get my life back. And I know if enough people get vaccinated, maybe they'll stop punishing me. Well, he just basically spat in their face. This is what we're dealing with, right? So backs against the ropes, both major parties at the state and federal level support the lockdown strategy. What are they supposed to do? Wait until next year to vote for between two major parties who think the same thing? Are they supposed to vote for a minor party? Well, the LDP, I believe, they seem to be anti-lockdown. They are against the restrictions that are currently in place in New South Wales. And good on them, they might get 1 or 2 MLCs up, which would be really good to see. So really, people left with nothing else to do. The only way they can make that political pressure felt to let the state government know, listen, lockdowns have a political calculus here. You stand to lose votes if you keep doing this without giving us a definitive end date. This seems to me to be the only way to actually make that voice heard. So look, it might end up being a net bad because it increased the spread, and I don't want that to happen. But again, I ask people, what else are desperate, struggling people meant to do?
I know when it came to some of the protests from Black Lives Matter last year, or even some of the Australia Day protests this year, there were similar concerns about spreading the virus there. But I have a question from the audience member on this, and it says here that when it came to the Black Lives Matter protests, a lot of left-wing people are totally fine with it. But when it comes to anti-lockdown protests, they're labeled as reckless, selfish. What are your thoughts on that? Are we seeing a double standard from different people within society?
100%. I think we have to accept the fact that double standards are going to be constant in society. There'll be tons of people whose only principles in life are that when people do something I like, it's good. When people do something me no like, it's bad. And unfortunately, this is the intellectual depth of a lot of people in our society. And you might say that, oh yes, there are a lot of these left-wingers out there who think that the BLM protest was totally fine, but the people out there protesting yesterday were evil. And you're right, but keep in mind, there are also a lot of right-wingers who support yesterday's protests, who would have been totally fine for the police to pepper spray and arrest all the BLM protesters. And look, the point has to be made that while both our protests have violated the public health orders, the BLM protests did happen before there were full lockdowns, or when there weren't full lockdowns. So even though that did violate the law, It was probably less of a violation this one is. I support the right to protest no matter what. I think the right to protest in a society like ours cannot and should not be curtailed in light of a risk like this. So I would support the rights of those BLM protesters, and I support the rights of the people yesterday who went out there and protested. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, the primary principle they operate on is self-preservation and safety. So any amount of curtailing of liberties or of safety is justified, sorry, of liberty or agency can be justified because we just have to lower down the number of dead people or the number of people in hospital. This is a very common mentality, unfortunately, in my opinion, but it is pervasive in our society. And as long as you have that mentality, I think people will come up with any sort of excuse to take issue with protesters protesting against anything.
I've wondered about in regards to whether the protests were right or not, even the very question. I wonder if it's the right question, because as you said, what are struggling people even meant to do in these situations? Is it at all possible to keep up an elimination strategy without jeopardizing, especially small businesses? Is there a way to continue the same strategy but allow people to move about freely somewhat?
In my opinion, absolutely not. There needs to be a sunset date for all of this stuff. There needs to be a date by which we simply have to say we can't afford to do this anymore. We can't afford to hammer the mental health and the opportunities of an entire generation of young people who've completely missed out for the sake of protecting people who mostly, the people at risk of this, can be protected with special protection singling them out rather than singling everybody else out. At a certain point, we have to be willing to say that. And until our Prime Minister gave the speech recently, it seemed to be that vaccination was our ticket to that point. It might not even be. Keep in mind that one of the reasons why we've managed to do decently and coast along so far, despite our strategies, is because our GDP has rebounded quite strongly. Now, one of the reasons are the high commodity prices. Our iron ore is being bought by China, who, by the way, they're desperately trying to find other suppliers. They just can't do it right now. Number two, our Reserve Bank is keeping the interest rates quite low, and they have no plans of increasing the rates. And if they did, quite frankly, a lot of people would end up having to default on their homes. With that being said, there are already inflationary pressures being felt to raise interest rates elsewhere in Europe, in the UK, in the USA. Those are going to be felt by our Reserve Bank too quite soon. It might be a few years before they finally bite the bullet and pull the plug, but it's going to happen. We can't keep this nonsense charade going on forever. At a certain point, we have to, I think, say, look, we're going to try to make sure everyone who wants a jab can get one, but by this date, we cannot do full lockdowns anymore. That at least is out off the table. We need to do this just to give also some commercial certainty to businesses and just a light at the end of the tunnel so people have some hope. Look, honestly, most people that you speak to might tell you, look, if I knew this thing was going to go on for another few weeks or for a month even, and I knew that was going to work, and I knew we'd get back down to manageable number of cases, I'd support it. I think that's fine. But the not knowing, the daily dirge and the weekly dirge of having nothing to look forward to, things like only getting worse by the day, by the week, that's going to grind on people like nothing else. And this right now, by the way, at a time when the rest of the world, other countries like ours, are all opening up, mainly because they have the more vaccinations in the community. We can't keep this going. This is absolute nonsense. And at some point, something's got to give.
I have another audience question here that says, what are your thoughts on the Premier and the Prime Minister entertaining the idea that the military should be utilized to enforce the lockdowns?
I think that's absolutely horrific. This is the kind of thing that you see happen in totalitarian societies. This is something that would be completely at home in the USSR, under some of the worst regimes in human history. Like I said, the majority of the spread of this thing seems to be from people who do essential things and who are following the rules. I think that when someone turns around and says, no, this is only not working because people are breaking the rules and they need to be disciplined, I think it's this sadistic totalitarian instinct in some individuals, which is really quite psychopathic and concerning. I don't think sending in the army is a great idea. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be effective, but even if we assume it is, I don't think it's worth doing it. Kudos to Gladys for at least saying, look, we're not going to do that yet. It should absolutely not have to come to that. In my opinion, if things are so bad that in order to achieve your target, of getting to zero or getting to almost no spread, you have to literally bring in the army and threaten people at gunpoint not to leave their homes. If things have to get that bad, to control a virus with a 14 times higher death rate than the flu, a dangerous virus, sure, but not literally HIV. If you have to do that, then the problem isn't the spread. The problem is your strategy. The problem is your target. Much better that we learn to live with this and manage our own health risks and try to make the vaccine as available as we can, as quickly as we can.